Welcome to Wicked Problems, and we're continuing again with our EV focus. Today we're talking about payments with the wonderful Niall Riddell from Paua, Paua. Paua's a payment processing solution for businesses, for business drivers. It's a really important part of the ecosystem that Niall's trying to attack here because, payments are a bit all over the place at the moment, if we're honest. And there's lots of different solutions out there, and some of them not as streamlined as others. So it's great that people like Niall are really working to try and streamline that process. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the large number of charge point operators or CPOs in the market, what's going to happen as they consolidate, and we're also going to talk about the EV rally. Very fun. Enjoy. Welcome, Niall, to Wicked Problems. It's great to have you here. Looking forward.
Neil, not now.
No, I done it again.
Don't worry. It's always better to get that one forward to sort of right from the start.
And it's a good one maybe to start with, because Niall, you're from Paua, not Paua, or
that's it.
Something else. Let's get on there. It's great to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to talking about all things to do with your journey, the journey of Paua, and all things EV, including payments. But tell me, how did you get started with Paua? And tell us a little bit about Paua and what it is.
So unlike a lot of people, I'm not from the automotive sector. So I came to this world from energy. So I spent 15 years in large energy companies, including EDF and SSE. And during that time, I had the privilege of running the electric vehicle team at EDF Energy. And what we looked at was the ability for a driver to leave their house, go out on the highway, plug in, go home, and have all those costs go back on the energy bill. But we never had a solution for it. So that left me with this area that I was interested in around aggregating data and payment. And ultimately, during the middle of COVID, decided to set up a business called Paua to enable drivers on the highway to find, charge, and pay for electric vehicle charging.
And so there's the sort of solutions you've got then are like a payment card, you've got a mapping area that people can go and find the nearest charger that takes your card, or is it also other cards? I don't know. I think you've also got something that helps people, reclaim when they're charging at home, so that if they're doing that charging for business, they're not having to pay for that charging that actually the business ought to be paying for.
Yeah, so we looked at this world of electric vehicle charging and went, okay, it's complex. And then we went, who's it most complex for? Where can we solve a problem? So we went to this idea of the fleet manager, the business driver. And the business driver has 3 locations they can charge. So for a business driver, the petrol station is dead. Electric vehicle drivers don't need petrol stations. And those 3 new locations they need instead of petrol stations are public charging, home charging, and workplace charging. And each of them has different problems associated with it. So we went out looking at this market and went, okay, so most businesses, the first thing they'll do is electrify their depot or their office. So they electrify their workplace. Then they might send some drivers home and they'll make arrangements for charging them at home. And the hardest thing for them to do is send them out in public, because there's 120 different public operators. You need to get a VAT invoice for all of them. It becomes very admin heavy. So we looked at simplifying the public experience. We then got drawn into home, and now we're currently looking at how we solve problems in the workplace.
You're absolutely right. As an EV driver myself, the experience in all of the different charging networks it's actually just different as well, and that makes it admin heavy, and it makes it mentally quite taxing, because you're like, do I tap first, plug in first, tap? Where do I get my invoice? Is it in an app, or do I have to get them to email it, or is it on a QR code? Or, that becomes very onerous from my perspective. And it's got nothing to do with EVs and whether they're any good or not, but it is about people thinking, well, that experience as an EV driver isn't nice and clean and simplified like it is maybe if you're paying for other goods.
Exactly. And I think what this has led to is we've ended up with this dynamic whereby we've been speeding up the acceleration faster and faster. We've now got heading on towards 2% of all vehicles on the road being battery electric. Sales are hitting about 20% of all new vehicles sales are battery electric. And we're entering a group of drivers who expect things to work. Initially, we got away with it. We had early adopters. They were happy to overcome challenges and solve problems. But the new group of drivers that we're having to deal with just expect stuff to work. So the biggest compliment we can receive is it just works. But we've got to make all that technical complexity go away for the new drivers. We've got to put it into systems and processes that us as businesses need to manage, so the adopting driver can find the charger, find a simple way to charge, have the payments routed to the right place, charge at home, be fairly reimbursed, or charge in the workplace, or share things between others. And all of these problems are problems that companies like ours are having to solve.
Very good. And I think there's a lot of us who are very glad that you're there doing that resolution stuff, because it can be a little bit annoying. Actually, probably less so for me as an EV driver, well, that's still annoying, but for my accounts team, it gets very, very annoying. You're seeing as you go through this, and I think you mentioned something that really piqued my interest actually there, which is they don't need petrol stations. Your EV driver doesn't need a petrol station. They need a workplace, they need a home, and they need some form of on the go, I guess. But it doesn't need to be a petrol station, because you're not going to go in there. The petrol station is designed around you stand at the pump, you fill up, and you're in the actual station itself to pay maybe 5 minutes if there's a little bit of a queue and you want to buy a chocolate and get a coffee. That's not the EV driving experience. So it's going to be interesting to see how the various actors in the market actually come on with that journey, and what will they do to respond? Because I think there's still a lot of thinking, oh, it's just a different form of fuel. All we have to do is completely keep everything as it is, and we'll just change the fuel type. That's not going to work, is it?
One of the things I explain to businesses when they're starting to make this transition is that you're switching out petrol and diesel for electricity. And to understand what that means for your business, you need to understand the basic fundamentals, which is power times time equals energy. With petrol and diesel, you can get a lot of energy into your vehicle very quickly. With electricity, unfortunately, we just cannot get the power high enough on most everyday vehicles to be able to get the energy across fast enough. So time is your big differentiator now. So all these businesses making the transition need to think about time. So there's operational impacts of that time, but there's also behavioral impacts of that time. So one of the most obvious ones that people quite often quote is, it takes me 30 seconds to fill up my car. I pull into my driveway, I plug my car in, I go to the house, I have dinner, I go to bed, it's full when I wake up. It took me 30 seconds to plug it in. That behavioral, that mindset change is really key. And if you take the petrol station analogy we started with just now, if you look at a motorway service station layout, you drive in, you park up, you go to the toilet, you get a coffee, change kids' nappies if you're at that age, which unfortunately I still am. 20 minutes later, you come back out, you get in the car, you drive around the corner and you go into the petrol station. And your petrol station filling experience takes you 9 to 10 minutes. Fill up the thing, you stand in the queue, you pay with your card and off you go. But the reality is that whole experience from driving into the motorway service area to leaving is 30 to 40 minutes. So the beautiful thing is, if you've got a grid serve, an Apple Green, a Tesla, you pull in, you pull up to the charger, you plug in, 30 to 40 minutes later on a 150, 200 kilowatt charger, you've quite happily got another couple of 100 miles in the car. And most people, and most normal people, are not going to drive 200 miles straight before they stop again. They'll probably drive for 2 hours, which on UK motorways will get you sort of 140, 150 miles. So another 150 miles later, you can stop, go to the toilet, plug in, do all the things, and you're back on again. But that shift in mindset, that shift in behavior, and also the physical shift of fueling from the back of the motorway service area to the front of the motorway service area is what's going to make this transition start to really tick for some people.
I think that's a very good point, because there's been a lot of, in my experience, and I've said it before, but a lot of the providers of motorway service areas in the beginning stages of this transition, it was almost like, well, we've got a dark and dingy corner at the back of the service area. We can throw the electric charger in there. No one will mind, because actually it's not an important thing. And as that's becoming more important, you're seeing, companies like, for instance, Shell have now got dedicated EV charging sites. Not just them, but, if you look at their one in Fulham, for example, it's only EVs. So now you're seeing people going, oh, I have to bring that whole EV experience and that charging experience to the front of house. So they're starting to think about what's going to be important in the eyes of the customer, and that will make them fit for purpose. That whole payments thing, I think, has to change as well. I got very frustrated at, I won't name the company, but went to a public service point and I had to tap my card. And of course it took £40 and then failed to deliver any charge. So then I tapped again. It took another £40 and failed to deliver any charge. By the time it actually got around to giving charge, I think it had taken £120. And then I had to wait 3 days to get the £120 back. Now, that was actually okay because it was on a credit card and it didn't really matter. I wasn't going to get stung for it. But if your credit card's nearly maxed out or if it's on your debit card, that could be a really frustrating experience for you. So there's little problems like that I think we still need to solve, right?
Oh, 100%. We get quite a lot of lower income drivers who come to us with exactly that pain point, which is I'm having a pre-authorization. And the reason the pre-authorizations exist for a very good reason, but they have the pre-authorization exactly as your experience 2 or 3 times. It holds the money back. It's the bank that's holding the money back, not the charge point operator. And it's all to do with the recognition of what the payment is for. And there's quite a lot of work going on in the industry to try and move that payment return process to something much more akin to a petrol station. Because a petrol station also does pre-authorizations, but the money comes back much faster. So there's a lot of work going on in the banking and payment world to try and speed up that return of cash to the driver. But the reason the pre-authorization exists is, sadly, near the beginning of our journey, people would put credit card readers on with no pre-authorization. So a driver would turn up with a preloaded credit card with £1 on it. They'd tap their £1 credit card and go, yep, credit card, and they'd start pushing electricity out. And after £50 worth of electricity, they'd stop the session. None of the money would be taken because there was not enough money on the credit card, and the driver would drive off with free electricity. So unfortunately, the things we're having to put in place are as a consequence of bad actors in our industry. And what happened is the £1 went to £5, the £5 went to £20, the £20 went to £40, and before you know it, you got pre-authorization escalation. So yeah, we're doing lots in this industry to try and make it easy for drivers. In our case, it's a slightly different ecosystem. The business pays for everything that goes through the card. So as a consequence, the business is ultimately the one who's responsible for paying that final bill. So I will reach out to the businesses at the end of our billing cycle, speak to them, and they will then pay the invoice on behalf of all of their drivers, which, if you think about it, if your boss has given you an electric van to replace your diesel van, seems like the fair thing to do. Here's a solution to pay for all your electric charging. And we'll help you when you're on the road, we'll help you when you get into the home, and we'll help you in the workplace. And that ultimately is where businesses are going to have to get to if they're going to make that transition to a full electric fleet a reality.
So there's a couple of good points in there. One is it isn't necessarily the EV, because I think you're an EV driver. Well, the face of this interaction that you're seeing is the charge point operator. And so you'll often be cursing and swearing and taking their name in vain when it's actually not them, but it's the way the system is set up by, going right the way back through to the bank. So you've got multiple actors. The issues could be happening at any point in that chain. So it's not necessarily anything to do with the charge point operator at all, although I suppose it could be, but it's not necessarily. And I think the other thing that's important there is, and bringing it back to, what Paua does, which is the fact that you're billing those business customers. And so you've got a different way of managing that service, which I think makes it much smoother.
The other thing that sits in alongside that is the experience. A van driver is usually going to a charge point because they're on a job. They're about to go to work. They're about to deliver some goods. They're about to fix a boiler. As a consequence of that, they just need something very simple that just works. If they're standing there cursing at the charge point operator because the credit card thing has failed again, that's never going to work. They need something they can literally tap and go. Going back to what we said earlier about time, we need to make this as fast as possible for the driver, because when they're not delivering goods or fixing boilers, they're not making money for their employer. And therefore, from an employment perspective, tap it, charge it, move on. So the time is far more important almost than the cost.
So time is really important. Having those breaks, if you're doing long journeys, is really important. I mean, you see those signs that you're on the motorway saying, take a break every 2 hours, which is good advice. And I've seen people, sitting in their EV at a charger, maybe having a little nap. That's not a bad thing, actually, if it's 10 minutes or something. What do you think the future looks like in this space as we, things like ISO 15 and 11.8 come into play, which are, new protocols that are going to basically turn the car into a wallet? amongst other things, and enable V2G and all the rest of it. But, that also has the effect of helping turn the car into a wallet. Is that going to simplify and streamline the process a bit more?
100%. I guess like a lot of technology that we're dealing with, we need to make sure it works and it's reliable and stable and ideally as close to universal as possible. The ISO 15118 standard, which I have mistakenly called in the past 15 lemonades, is a standard which effectively tokenizes the vehicle and the charge point. And those two tokens then speak to each other and go, yes, I recognize you. Yes, I recognize you. Handshake and enable charging to take place. So I always joke that Tesla drivers don't drive electric vehicles. Tesla drivers drive Teslas. And Tesla has built a beautiful system, from top to bottom of driver experience, onboarding, payment, charging. It's all nice and slick. ISO 15118 enables us to get van drivers and multi-mark vehicle drivers into an experience similar to a Tesla. It means that they can drive down the road, grab the connector, plug it into the vehicle, and the charging will then handshake and start automatically. I've seen it done. It's a very slick process. The challenges that sit in this space is you need widespread adoption for charge point operators to enable it, and widespread adoption for car OEM manufacturers to deliver it, the capability in the software from the factory. And then people like us can put a token on the car, and we're working with the charge point operator. We put a token on the charge point operator. And then when the van turns up at the charge point, the two handshake, and happy days, we're able to make a simple, seamless transaction start without apps and without cards. And the beautiful thing is, if it's done right, you can update the driver, give them insights to their charging, tell them it's still running, give them the cost in real time until at the end of the cycle, it stops. The driver can then head on their way. And the charging sessions, in our case, would all get centralized to the fleet manager. So it sounds like a dream. We're getting closer and closer to a decent number of partners on all sides. The team at Hubject are probably leading the charge on this. They have an ecosystem now, and they've got dozens of different automotive operators, charge point operators coming together to enable this ecosystem to work.
Yeah, it's often not the biggest drag in the world, but just the idea that you can plug it in, like I've done. I've got an Audi, but I can plug it into the Tesla network. So I've got my card set up in the Tesla app. And then if I find that I'm at a Tesla supercharger that's open to the public network, I can just plug it in and tell it in the app, just start charging. And it's so much simpler. It really does simplify it and make it a lot easier.
We've got to be careful about that because, that description you just gave is not as fast and slick as you'll be able to do when we get to a full 15.11.8 deployment. When we get to a full 15.11 deployment, there's no app. You don't need the app. You set it up on the car. The charge point operator has the other token. You plug it in. You walk away. That's it. It's done. And that, I think for some people, the app is a barrier. I have 110 EV charging apps on my phone. You quite often get people telling me, I've got 8 to 10. I've collected them. I've got 110. We don't need more apps. We don't need more cards. What we need is better consumer experiences.
I agree with that. I did ended up at a motorway service area, and it was a provider, a CPO that I hadn't come across before, because there are so many CPOs at the moment. We'll talk about that maybe in a moment. But again, they wanted me to download their app to get 5p off per kilowatt hour. Now that's quite a nice discount, 5p off per kilowatt hour. But I just didn't want to go through the faff of downloading an app. There's no Wi-Fi for me to download it over. I've got loads of these things on my phone already. It's like, I just can't be bothered. So you know what? I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to tap and do it and be lumbered with the 5 pence per kilowatt extra, which sounds economically foolish, but it's just that mindset-wise, I can absolutely see why people go, I can't download another app and then put my card details in there and then sign up and consent to this, that, and the other. It's just going to take too long. I'm not doing it. We should talk about the amount of, we talked about the amount of apps, but the amount of apps is symptomatic, I think, of two things. One is a way of thinking. We must have an app. And that's not necessarily the right way of thinking. But the other thing it's symptomatic of is the fact that there's just so many CPOs. I think in Europe at the moment, there's more than 2,000. That's a very saturated market. I can see that, people who think about the sort of experiences that you're talking about, streamlining it, making it fit for purpose in the eyes of the customer, which is a thing that we always talk about as a consultancy, as being something that differentiates you and makes people want to come back. we're probably not going to see all of those CPOs do it. And with such a saturated market, and we are playing a bit of crystal ball gazing here, but where do you think the market's going to go as an actor in that market space now? Do you think we can maintain that level of charge point operators, or do you think there's going to be some consolidation, or what do you reckon?
I've got some quite particular views on this. If you break down the charge point operator business model and the types of charge point operators, it helps reveal where this might go. If you look at something like a retail outlet, a supermarket, a pub chain, or something similar, you can quite quickly see that they quite often own the land. They've got a relationship with the customer. And this is a bit like Wi-Fi. You know, the new generation of drivers who turn up expect it to be available. So they're expecting to see a charge point at their farm shop, at their retail outlet, at the local pub chain. So in that world, a pub manager or a retail manager might go out and go, well, how do I build a public charging network for my 5 pubs I've got in Southeast England? And they will go and they will find an electrician who will install a charger. They'll put it in the car park. They'll hook it up to a piece of software, and they'll start charging those drivers for that experience of plugging in at their local pub chain. Quite quickly, you can go, well, that's another charge point operator. And therefore, you have to get into the definition of what the charge point operator actually is. And the CPO could also be the owner. In this case, the pub chain owns that infrastructure, but the operator might actually come from the software provider. So a software company like EVIES will provide you a service to manage phone calls, manage payments, look at uptime, reliability, all that sort of stuff. And therefore, they might end up operating it. So you might have pub chain's brand on the charger, operated by EVIES or Monta or Spiri or one of the software providers. But in an app, it might appear as a pub chain brand. So quite quickly you go, oh, there's another operator. So that's the 2,000 operators you referred to a moment ago. And at that sort of retail park and outlet level, you can see that what will probably happen is you'll get consolidation at a software layer. So those retail outlets will all be running on one of 5 or 10 different providers. Drives, Ampeco, EVIES, Greenflux, Spiri. These guys are all aggregating locations up and down the country or across Europe to enable a common software experience. However, if you then go and look at like a motorway or an arterial road network, these are really strategic locations to get chargers. And most of the chargers going onto those locations on A roads and highways are going to be either rapid, ultra rapid, super rapid, fast with an extra dibble of really fast. But they're going to be sort of 100 kilowatt plus chargers. These are much more expensive bits of equipment. It's a much more involved process to operate and manage a big hub of 20 or 30 chargers. And therefore, you'll get specialized operators. And those specialized operators today are people like Instavolt, GridServe, Osprey, Ionity, Fastned. And there's, dozens of them. You go into Europe, you got ANBW, Electra. There's a lot of operators running these arterial road networks. That, for me, is more likely the space we're going to see brand name consolidation. So you've got vested interests from BP, who run petrol stations, Shell, who run petrol stations, Motor Fuel Group, who run petrol stations, who are going to be looking at these networks and these locations and going, do we want to aggregate? Do we want to buy? Do we want to build our own? And we're seeing various movements from those parties already. So I can see aggregation happening, acquisition at some style on motorways, but it might not be of the best. It might be aggregation of the worst, people who fail before they succeed. And therefore, you might find you get asset sales from collapsed businesses who aren't performing well on these areas. So I think consolidation of some form will happen. It might be software layer at an AC level and a sort of retail outlet level. And it might be more like a big aggressive player picking up failed businesses on the DC arterial level. But I think we've got a few more years to go before we'll start seeing that happen at a significant level.
And that's actually a maturation of the marketplace, right? Because, you see people like you talked about Shell and BP, Pulse. Those are examples of organizations that have decided that they're going to exit the home market. Now, wind the clock back 5 years, 6 years, all of those players were thinking, well, we'll do whole of market. Now what you're seeing is, no, we're going to consolidate around now. I can't tell you if that's the right strategy or the wrong strategy for them, and time will tell us. But you can see why they're doing it, right? You can see that's them thinking, well, we'll consolidate around where we know. And yes, they may then pick up stranded assets from companies that, may be too small to make it profitable in that space or didn't get it quite right or whatever. And then they consolidate, as you say, by taking some of those worst players out of the market, hoovering them up as they take themselves out of the market. So yeah, I definitely can see that.
The home environment is a really interesting one because there's now hundreds of different registered providers of home electric vehicle charge points. So manufacturing and delivering home energy hardware is quite hard because there's hundreds of operators. And particularly with the flood of Chinese providers, we got more hardware than you can imagine. We do have some really strong homegrown players who are, taking a decent market share of that. So the Indras, the My Energies, the EOs, who've all played a role in getting home chargers onto people's houses. But you can see that the big oil and gas and energy companies are kind of stepping away from that point. EDF is perhaps an exception because it's still involved with PodPoint and it's doing things at that household level. And British Gas has brought its own charger to market in the form of Hive. So there's a dynamic in the home space which still hasn't quite worked out. What we do know is installing a home charger is quite hard work. People often, it's £1,000. And then you have to add a cable run, add a drill through a wall, put in an earth rod. And the complexity of home installation means that it's put a lot of the bigger players off that marketplace. We're now starting to see the rise of a few specialists like Plug Me In, who specialize in getting chargers into people's houses. And as a consequence, I think we'll see quite a lot of dynamic changing between your local electrician and a large specialist player in terms of how we bring volumes of chargers to the market, because we've still got millions of homes to outfit with chargers. So there's still a good market opportunity in there. It's just who's going to win that battle for a smooth, slick experience in the house. But like you say, BP backed out of it previously. A few others have looked at it and gone, not for me, thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, right? If you want to specialise in a particular market and not in another, that's entirely up to you as a company to have that strategy. And we'll see how that works out for them. And there's all sorts of dynamics that can come into whether they win or lose in those markets. Product market fit, thinking about things from the customer's side. What's the payment experience like? Have they got the right people in the leadership teams? All sorts of things that can come into to that, and that's true of any business, by the way. So I'm not singling anyone out, but let's just see. It'd be great to see how that plays out. And as you say, you've got all those people in the marketplace also doing consolidation of things like software, Hubject, and so on. I wanted to talk with you a little bit. This is about something you did a little while ago, and I just wanted to find out how it was. I think you drove an EV from John O'Groats to Land's End, or was it the other way around?
It was John O'Groats to Land's End. For the last 3 years, we have supported something that Greenfleet has run called the EV Rally. So in 2022, we set up to run a group of vehicles, about 50, from John O'Groats to Land's End. And this was quite near the beginning of our own journey. And the big challenge we had is we volunteered to provide the electric vehicle charge card to get this group of 50 commercial vehicles from one end of the country to the other. So our challenge for us personally was aggregating a big enough network to enable drivers to charge seamlessly on one card, tap, 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 all the way from one end of the country to the other. So we did that in 2022, and we were fortunate that we had companies like ChargePlace Scotland join us. We were one of the first partners to bring ChargePlace Scotland to market. No, we were the first partner to bring ChargePlace Scotland into a roaming solution. And that enabled us to bring that charging experience from one end of the country to the other. So people like GridServe joined us, Swarco joined us. We got this network which was big enough to drive all those vehicles. The following year, the challenge changed. So in 2023, we took the 5 capitals challenge. We drove from Cardiff to London, London to Edinburgh, Edinburgh to Belfast, Belfast to Dublin. And we swept in the Irish experience into that. And it was very interesting because Scotland's network is quite fragmented. It's got a more rural network. But when you hit Northern Ireland and Ireland, it's even more fragmented. It's at earlier stages of development than the network we have here in England in particular. So as a consequence, this experience showed us what we could do. The other nice thing we did in 2023 was we took 2 electric trucks with us. So we took an electric DAF and an electric Mercedes, both rigid, 19 tons, I think the Mercedes was. And we took them and drove them around these routes. And that started to showcase what was possible with an electric truck and what was very, very hard with an electric truck. And we've got, some experiences of people putting the vehicles sideways, putting cables over the top of fences, using other people's locations, sharing depots, which enabled us to then run the 2024 rally, where not only did we have the rigid truck from DAF, we had a fully articulated e-Actros 600 from Mercedes. So this was pulling, it was a 42-ton payload in total, gross vehicle weight, I think they like to call it. We had a motorbike. So Crazy Sam Clark took his motorbike on the rally. We had a prototype vehicle. We had a new-to-market 4x4. And it was really trying to push the boundary and showcase what the vehicles can do. And ultimately, as the official charge card provider, we provided that charging for that whole flotilla of vehicles as we went around the country, trying to demonstrate what is possible with electric vehicles today. And it's exciting because you start to see that, the mainstream cars are here. You can drive wherever you want in a mainstream car now. But these more niche vehicles, the off-roading 4x4s, big, heavier vehicles we need to decarbonize, long distance road transport are starting to emerge as well.
I think that sounds really good. Presumably nobody was on an e-bike on that. I know Sam was on an e-motorbike, but I mean an
not on an e-pedal bike. No e-pedal bikes. Maybe next year. I'll suggest it to Sam. I think he'll like it.
I've got a bike, but I'm still on pedal power only, unfortunately. And just before we wrap it up, if people want to learn more about Paua, if they want to learn more about the work that you do, where should they go?
So we are at paua.com, paua.com, or you'll probably find we're all over LinkedIn. Look for the little pink blobs, the little pink chevrons. We find ourselves onto LinkedIn social media every day. We love speaking to people, where a lot of our innovations, including how we reduce the cost of energy, how we manage and reimburse home charging, how we enable shared depots, those innovations come from our customers. They come from people like you going, I have a problem. How do I solve it? So come and speak to us and we can solve your electric vehicle charging problems. What
we'll do is we'll drop your URL under the show notes as well, so that people can click on that from there if they're going to this from the wickedproblems.fm website. But otherwise, it's www.paua.com if you're listening to this on one of the other podcast platforms. Neil, it's been fantastic to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Toby. Appreciated it.